is Jeremy Thake. I'm an enterprise architect at AvePoint. I've got a bit of flu, so if I'm coughing and spitting a bit, I do apologise. Usually I've got a very clear talk when I'm on these presentations, but I figured I wouldn't cancel on you guys and go ahead with this. I was a co-founder of a website called nothing but SharePoint.com with Mark Miller. So I did a developer channel, and then Mark does the end user, and we both share the IT Pro channel. So feel free to check that out. And as you can see, my Twitter and LinkedIn sites are up there if you want to contact me after the show.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. So, first things that first, today's the question and answer session. And so, one of the things that I did was talk to Jeremy about the 5 top questions that he receives on a daily basis. And we wanted to warm Jeremy up, and we want to give him any of the hard stuff a bit, too fast. So let's talk to him a little bit about the things he already knows and he's used to answering. The first being, what does AvePoint do?
Okay, well, that's can be quite an easy one. So essentially, AvePoint, we're based in, our headquarters is based in New Jersey, but we have offices all over the world, 25 offices on 5 different continents. And we've been around since 2001. So I started work there in April last year. I was originally living in Western Australia and then moved over to come work in HQ. We essentially build administration, management, and governance solutions on top of SharePoint. So we're very focused on SharePoint. Our DocAv platform is essentially everything to do with SharePoint across the whole life cycle. You'd be involved with within SharePoint. We have 8,000 customers in 63 different countries. And obviously we've won a fair few awards at different conferences and magazine articles as well. So yeah, it's a real honour to work with AvePoint, and especially in the role that I'm in.
Thanks for that overview, and I know a lot of people want to know. I'm going to actually break down that question a little bit further, which is, let's just kind of combine these 2 questions with, why AvePoint for a company perspective, but also, what's new with DocAv 6, and talk about that, the new product that you guys have listed this year, or actually late last year.
Yeah, I guess from where we have one of the key things that kind of differentiates us a lot is that we do actually have a 24/7 global support crew. So we have a very big team in our New York office that work for 12 hours of the day, and then they kind of give the virtual high fives over to Asia Pac, where then they take over the other 12 hours. So whenever you have any issues with our products, you can ring up our support, and they'll eagerly help you guys to fix any of those solutions. And they also help with kind of generic SharePoint questions as well. So it's not just about our DocAv or our other products, but just to help out in general with SharePoint once you've got a support contract with us. So a lot of technical support we get is actually just basic questions about SharePoint, which customers find very useful to be able to answer that. From a perspective of DocAv is our kind of enterprise management class governance platform. Essentially, we've had a fair few releases now. We're up to version 6. Realistically, what we're doing now is we're enabling an organisation to implement an entire range of governance requirements into the management of SharePoint. So whether it be like from a deployment and migration perspective to kind of bulk administration tasks, all the way through to things like data protection, with your backup and granular recovery, and then lots of stuff around kind of storage optimization. So we've had a very popular remote blob storage product that we use, and then we have some compliance options as well in there too. So we do have a very broad range of things. I encourage, if you guys are interested in having a look at avepoint.com to kind of get a bit of an idea about what the products can do. What does SharePoint governance actually mean? That's a very broad question. From my perspective, the way I answer that is SharePoint governance is really kind of the combination of a few things. It's really to do with the people in the organisation. It's to do with the policies that are kind of agreed on within the organisation, and then the processes that are used to actually enforce those policies that are agreed on by the people. And under those 3 elements is the technology that's used to enforce those processes and enforce those policies. So we kind of have like a 4-way element thing there that kind of influences SharePoint governance. And each of those 4 areas has various different requirements that influence customers looking for help around governance. Is, keep to define your governance plan. But unfortunately, because there are those 4 elements in terms of people, policy, process, and technology, each company is a little bit different because the requirements often vary very dramatically, even in an organisation which may be in the same vertical. So, we're talking to 2 big financial houses in New York at the moment, and their requirements are very, very different. So their governance plans are looking very, very different from that perspective as well. So there is no 2 companies, I believe, that will have the same governance plan. But what I try and kind of advise is that people are aware of expectation to align the business and IT on what SharePoint is there for, and what they should expect from things like a service level agreement perspective. Because often the business and IT are not aligned, and the expectations are very, very grey moving around. So the governance plan for me is really about kind of aligning those 2. And then also defining that agreement between all the people in the governance committee which represent the organisation to allow them to kind of come up with a very straightforward plan to set those expectations.
I'm glad you gave me that overview about SharePoint governance, and you recently did a talk at the SharePoint User Group about applications lifecycle management, also known as ALM. And I wonder if you can just give us a quick overview about that, and as well as how does working in the cloud change any of the processes, if it does at all?
Sure. So, application lifecycle management is something that I've kind of been involved in a lot of my career. The times when I was a web developer, I worked in a very large team of nearly 50 developers, and we had 14 leads, and we were all checking code every day. And one of the biggest problems we had was how we actually manage that core applications being built by all these people. So application lifecycle management is really about the kind of, from the start of the application to the end of the application, how you capture that the code into source control, how you then automatically build that application with a build server, and then how you actually deploy that into your shared dev, test, and production environments. One of the things when we talk about SharePoint is that an application is not necessarily that easy to scope. So some people will think an application is like the internet, or maybe an extranet as an application on top of SharePoint, or maybe a BI portal. But what I kind of tend to believe is that applications are actually a bit more discrete than that. So an intranet will be made up of multiple web parts, such as a stock ticker web part or a weather web part. To me, those things are applications. And what I mean by that is that those web parts will change at different times because of business requirements. So when I think about, like the stock exchange ticker, that might get put on in version 1 of the intranet. But then in 6 months' time, there may be a requirement to modify the graphics of that stock ticker. Whereas the weather web part may not change for maybe 18 months. So if you kind of have those web parts together in one application lifecycle, you're going to have to regression test the weather web part as well as the stock ticker web part in most examples. So I try and encourage people to think about applications a lot more discreetly in SharePoint, and therefore when you're making changes, you don't have to cross-test a lot of those other web parts that you may have deployed at the same time and wrapped up in one Visual Studio project. And one thing that surprises me when I do this talk is, and I've done this now in 3 different cities, is not very many people are actually using source control when they're doing SharePoint design, and developers, and they have their own environments, won't see the versions I'm working on. So there's a very big challenge there in terms of how you source control the SharePoint designer aspects of your master spaces and stuff in that way. Because there's no easy way of pushing those versions across multiple environments out of the box. With Visual Studio developers, straight out of the IDE, you can actually hook into the source control, whether it be TFS, whether it be Subversion or Mercurial. One of the key things they've just announced is that there is now a TFS 2011 Express Edition, which is completely free and allows you to do source control for free. So there's no excuse anymore for not using source control out of the box, because it's just the next install onto a server, and then all your developers can connect to that in Visual Studio, and then essentially Therefore, they're getting that kind of that feedback of sharing that code and capturing all those versions. From a cloud perspective, I guess where that can change ALM, I mean, when we talk about the cloud, there's lots of different type elements of the cloud. But I guess really, in terms of the SharePoint perspective, when we talk about the cloud, we're talking about Azure, and we're talking about SharePoint 2010 on LAN, which is part of the Office 365 environment. When we talk about ALM there, really, the only way you can do any kind of development work there is if you're a SharePoint designer, obviously you can poke into your site collections in SharePoint Online and start modifying those things. Now immediately, because that's a shared environment, if you've got 2 or 3 SharePoint designers in there, they're all going to be able to modify those master pages and they're all going to be able to see the versions because they're sharing a single environment. The big scary thing from an ALM perspective with Office 365 SharePoint Online is there is no concept of a dev environment or a test environment. You basically have production. So Microsoft's stance on that is, well, you should really be doing this stuff in a local dev environment. So a virtual machine running on your laptop that you install like from a next install. The biggest thing I find in that is that if you're making a lot of changes, maybe you're building up 5 different master pages, bunch of style sheets, a lot of images, a few different page layouts, and you're making kind of tweaking site settings and stuff. To move that into your SharePoint Online environment, there's no way out of the box to push all those changes up there. So what you have to do is repeat all those tasks, and you end up having 2 SharePoint Designer windows open, copying and pasting between your development box and your production SharePoint Online cloud server. So with SharePoint Designer, it can be a bit tricky. Now, just to quickly mention, we do have some tools, we have Point that actually help to automate and even run comparisons against those things. So you can kind of see what has changed between 2 environments and promote those things through. From a cloud perspective with Visual Studio, when you think of SharePoint Online, we're really talking about sandbox solutions. There's no way of producing a full trust solution package and pushing that into SharePoint Online, so you have to use sandbox. So if you're building sandbox solutions, you can obviously indeed use your TFS source control to version everything going through and automatically build those sandbox solutions. And even now with Visual Studio 2011, the preview that's just been released, we can even F5 deploy that sandbox solution now directly to the SharePoint Online environment, which you couldn't do in Visual Studio 2010. So from an application lifecycle perspective, sandbox solutions are better because it does basically package up all of those things that you're working with. But I guess the reality is, and we found this with nothing but SharePoint.com, is that if people are doing things in master pages and page layouts, they're typically going to be web designers. They're not going to be developers that write C# and VB code. So they're not going to be comfortable working with Visual Studio. They're much more comfortable working with SharePoint Designer. So, the reality is that there will be this essence of copying and pasting content between 2 different environments for the near future.
We actually got a question in while you were speaking about about SharePoint Designer, and it's from Daniel. He's asking, what is the robust approach for moving designer stuff from dev to I don't know what he's saying there, and live style sheets, master pages, and content types. Can you see the question?
Yeah, so it is a good question. I get it a lot. I kind of semi-answered it there in terms of really the only way, and it's going back to that kind of the days when I was an ASP.NET developer where maybe you were tweaking iOS settings and you were deploying things manually to the GAC. You'd write a Word document which were all those changes that would need to be done on the UAT and production environments. So unfortunately, it's a lot about documentation. But the biggest risk with all this is that you forget a step. So if I create a content type in my developer environment, and I have a page layout associated with that content type, and in my deployment documentation, I move that page layout into the UAT environment, but I don't move the content type, that page layout's not going to work, or you're not going to be able to associate it. So it's very important as you do stuff in your development environment that you keep records of what you're actually doing. Now, out of the box, there's no real easy way of doing that, other than, and this is one thing I have done in the past, is if you've got access to your PowerShell command line, you can actually run PowerShell scripts to actually say, based on modified date, what's changed. So I can run, these are the master pages that have changed, these are the page layouts that have changed, these are the style sheets that have changed based on a particular date being greater than. Now obviously you can do that by eye if you're a SharePoint designer. You can sort your files by the modified date. But often that would mean jumping through multiple libraries and multiple sites. Unfortunately, what this isn't going to be great for capturing is things like if you've made any modifications to site settings, or if you've created some SharePoint groups and you've added different members to it. So it is very, very tricky to move these things. Now, you can export sites and import sites as site templates. And they're a big kind of, I get on my soapbox a lot about this in terms of that's okay for the first time. So I can export my sub-site, I can import my sub-site, and that's version 1. But then what happens is, in my development environment, I might modify content type, I might create a new web part on my home page. The problem is, if I then export that and re-import that into production, that's going to overwrite whatever's in production. And the problem with that is that production may, there might be an announcements list where there's been 50 announcements since version 1 went in. And if you re-import your site, you're actually going to delete all those announcements that are in production. So it's great for version 1, but it's not going to be any good for those kind of iterative releases that come through. And yes, with SharePoint Designer, the only real approach there is going to be to have 2 SharePoint Designer windows open and copying and pasting. Other than that, you're going to have to look at some third-party tools such as DocApp's Deployment Manager and Content Manager to basically run some comparisons in like a very rich visual environment to then push those things through.
Thanks a lot, Jeremy. And I wanted to just open the floor to anyone who wants to ask a question about these 5 questions that Jeremy just answered before we move on to a question that was submitted last week. All right, good stuff, and great overview there, Jeremy.
Thank you.
So, great. Let's see here. We actually received a question. This was the very first question we received on our SharePoint ShopTalk site from Nicole, and she'll be happily receiving a Pluralsight subscription for 1 month. And Nicole, I wanted to make sure that I unmute you, or that you're unmuted, so that you can ask a question to Jeremy directly. Okay, you're unmuted.
Okay.
Hi.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, hi there.
Hey, how are y'all? Okay, so we bought DocApp last year when we were planning an intranet launch, which we just launched it last week successfully, and now I'm trying to learn the tool. So I just, of course, got my upgrade notice, so we're on 5.7.0. So I want to know what I'm going to gain if I go all the way to 6, and if I should go to 6, do I have to go to 5.7.2 and then 6, or just straight to 6?
So, a very good question. I'm going to think of this off the top of my head, which is cool. So, with 5.7, that was a very different, architecture than 6. So the biggest thing we released in 6 was a brand new user interface that's been built with a very, very user experience way mine discovered. We actually had 4 different user experience consultants come in and analyze what we were doing in 5 and make some recommendations about how we can improve the user experience in all of our products. The biggest thing to be aware of with 6 is that the migration suite and the compliance suite aren't in 6 as yet. They will be available in future service packs that we're releasing in DocApp 6. The biggest thing is really, what products are you using in 5.7 at the moment? What have you actually purchased?
We've got Administrator, which has Report Center, and then Content Manager and Auditor. We don't have migration or
Okay, great. So that instance, if you're using those tools, I would highly recommend that you look at upgrading because, as I say, the user experience was the big focus, and all of those products are in version 6, and with this very much more wizard base now, the tree on the left-hand side to kind of drill through the site collections and sub-sites. We've done a lot of work with some very, very smart people to make that extremely quick. And we have some very smart caching going on there so that your experience when you jump in and move between administrator and content manager is seamless. So if I'm kind of an administrator and I'm making changes, maybe bulk changes to some site settings across your site collection, if I jump over to my content manager tool, the tree will actually stay selected on that particular site collection. So it allows you to kind of jump and hop around between the products now in a seamless way. Now in terms of the upgrade, the products actually install side by side. So you can install version 6 directly next to version 5.7. And that way you can actually, and there's an evaluation available, you can actually trial those products out before you decide to uninstall Docker 5.7 from your environment.
Okay, so we need to uninstall 5.7 and install 6 plain? It's not a...
No, there is not. And it's purely because the technology that we were running on 5.7 was very different. We're now a completely .NET based Silverlight front-end product. Previously there was other kind of platform technologies we were using.
Okay, that's good to know. It sounds like y'all have fixed the stuff that I was frustrated with, which was the tree and the disconnect between the modules, so I'm excited now.
Yeah, I must admit, when I joined in April, and I was actually using 5 a lot, and when we joined in April, they were just doing the user experience stuff, and it was really cool to kind of see all the feedback they were getting from customers on what needed to be changed in the user interface to make it more efficient, for day-to-day use.
So I gather it's best to move to 6, and Daniel's wondering how, seamless is that move from 5.7 to 6? Can you do it without any issues?
Yeah, so they install side by side, so that you can install them in the same server. There's no conflict there between the two. So there are no issues in that sense. With the RTM, which obviously came out in January, I can't forget the date now, 14th maybe. The plans that you have in certain products, currently you have to recreate those in 6. We are working to build a tool that will migrate your 5 plans to your 6 plans. But at the moment, you have to recreate those yourselves. That was just really a decision we made that we'd rather get the product out there to market and then release the migration tool between the 2 major versions.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Nicole, for your question. And Daniel, I hope that ends. Yes? Oh, sorry. I hope that answered your question, Daniel. So we have a couple of more questions slotted for. Oh, yes, he said that answers the question. So thanks a lot, Jeremy.
Good.
And we have a couple of more questions, and we have another question from the group. So I want to get to that. So we can just briefly go through these next 3 questions. The first I find very important to me, just in terms of understanding overall governance, is how do you choose the members of a governance committee? And if you can, please tell the group how you kind of persuade a company to even create a governance committee. I know a lot of times there's companies that are out there that aren't really practicing governance.
Yeah, I get that question a lot when I go and walk into organizations. Traditionally, governance committees work with the IT staff because they're the ones that are installing SharePoint. They're the ones that have to go through the procurement and get the money to actually get SharePoint in the door. I personally think that's the wrong approach. SharePoint really should be purchased from a business need, not just from a technology need. So the first thing I try and recommend is that, well, if you've bought SharePoint, what did you have in mind? And typically, it's a few things. It's either, well, we need collaboration, or we need social, or we need search, or we need a document management system, we want to replace the file share. The first thing you need to do is, well, think about those business users who are involved. Think about the ones that are basically yelling at IT, going, we need a better way of doing this. And they're the guys you need to get involved in the committee. So as well as IT people being involved, you should really be out there getting those business owners, those champions, the information management people, HR, marketing, communications, finance, the big guys that are influential across the organisation should be involved in that governance committee. The other people I think should be involved is typically you'll have applications on SharePoint as you mature. Those applications may be things like the annual leave process gets built into SharePoint, or maybe your expense forms get built into SharePoint. Those applications will have business owners. So maybe for the expense claims people, that'll be your, the CFO may delegate someone within his team to the owner of that application. Those are the people that you also want in the governance committee, because when you make any agreements on that governance committee, it's going to affect all those applications, it's going to affect all those workloads running in SharePoint. And you need the business representatives there before you make any kind of big decisions. So that's really, really where it is. Now, the biggest problem with that is that everyone's busy, and people don't have time to sit in these meetings. So it's very important you come up with an efficient way of running governance meetings, and that you track them properly. The amount of companies I see that have meetings for the sake of having meetings, don't have an agenda, don't have action items, they get to the next meeting, and then they're talking about the same things over and over again. It's pretty scary. So my first recommendation is definitely get the business users involved that are very onerous on SharePoint, but also just to go back to the basics and set a really good foundation for your meetings by having a decent agenda, by having a regular meeting at a regular time, and to ensure that those actions that get done are talked about straight away at the beginning of the next meeting. It may sound simple, but the amount of times I've seen that not happen is pretty disappointing.
Jeremy, I have a question for you as well. Can you hear me?
Sure. Yeah.
No, you already touched on the fact that everyone is busy and people in the company, they really don't want to think about governance, and they want they want governance to be as transparent as possible to them. So what would be your recommendation in terms of how do I convince the right people that they should become members of this governance committee?
So can you repeat that time? You were breaking up a little bit.
So the gist of the question is, how do I convince those, once I find the right people for this to become governance committee, how do I convince them that it's important for them to become part of this committee?
Yeah, it's very true. So this one is a little bit sneaky, and I'm over to Australia with people, not that it will kind of transpire over here in America. But one of the things that was happening in Australia was, well, if you're not part of the governance committee, you can't have your application. So it's a little bit like, well, if you want your annual tracking application in here, you do have to turn up to those meetings, which can be a little bit seen as, a little bit harsh. But in reality, that's one way of doing it. The other kind of formal way of doing it, which I've found, is that you make that part of someone's performance plan. So as part of the kind of like quarterly, PEPs or whatever you call them within your organisation, you're actually measured on your attendance of the governance meetings, and the success of that governance committee is part of the performance of you internally within the organisation. And that should hopefully help drive from that perspective. In reality, though, those things, sometimes if they're forced into them, people aren't that care. So you really, you have to get lucky in a sense to find the people that are passionate. And usually, I say this a lot of my talks, is walk around the office and look for someone with an iPad on their desk, or look for someone with some new technology hanging around, or look for someone with a SharePoint, for beginners book on their desk. They're usually the champions that are keen on technology and will be more than happy to help out. They're the real ones you want in there because they're passionate, they want to be there, as opposed to the guys that, you're forcing to be there based on performance plans or based on them having to have their application delivered.
Yes, thanks a lot. We have a follow-up question that says, when engaging business leaders for governance, how can we offset or mitigate their natural desire to treat SharePoint as an application for their business unit as opposed to the stated goal of collaboration or social site hosting service?
Yeah, the best one I had here was turn it off, just switch SharePoint off, and basically their system was the organisation. Again, very, very harsh measures, but maybe that's what they do in Australia as a standard. It does come up a lot. I've actually just written a series of articles on .cab.com, which is our community site. And essentially what it is a series of like almost horror stories of if you don't have governance, this is what can happen. And this was a massive request I was getting from people. You know, that people don't see the importance of governance. You know, SharePoint's running, it's fine, there's no big dramas. You know, but behind the scenes, there's a poor guy who's struggling to keep the thing alive. You know, he's deleting log files every day, SQL's going nuts, there's error messages everywhere, the backup tapes aren't being run. You know, the governance is very, very important. And SharePoint does quickly become business critical. So you do need to just go there with those horror stories. And the way you can do that, you know, again, the articles kind of focus on different areas. But it's very important to understand that you know, SharePoint has lots of workloads. So in that question now, you talked about collaboration and social. There's lots of other workloads in SharePoint can include. And the trick is not to jump in and do all those workloads at once. You've really got to pick those quick wins. And to be a real salesperson, you'd say something like low-hanging fruit, but I'm not going to do that. Where, you know, social is not necessarily a quick win. Collaboration definitely is. You know, if you've got a bunch of people running projects and you need to kind of have a way of, you know, pushing these things through, then the collaboration is a great way of doing that. But you still need governance around it. Because you might have, you know, the service level agreement. IT might go, well, it's acceptable that if we lose SharePoint, if we can get it up within 4 days, that's fine. Whereas the business might go, you know, no way, I need this back within 3 hours. And again, that comes back down to aligning the business with IT. And a lot of the time, if you sit there with your business leaders around governance and just start dropping those kind of things around, you know, SLAs on recovery, SLAs on page performance, SLAs on what's available to be created and not created, you'll actually start getting a lot more engagement off them as well. SharePoint really does have to be treated as a business critical system. I worked at a company in Australia where the CIO goes, SharePoint's a level 2 system. We don't have to worry about the SLAs. We'll recover it as soon as we can, but there's no importance on that over our Exchange, Active Directory, and our other specific CRM system. But what the CIO didn't realise was that the CEO was using SharePoint to store all of his management meeting minutes and all of his letters and etc. that he communicates with external people, because he'd been to a few sessions where people were encouraging collaboration within SharePoint rather than email and on your laptop and your file shares. So when SharePoint did go down, and it went down hard, it took 3 days to get the file back up and get his contact back in there. And the CEO went absolutely nuts. So obviously now that system is now a priority 1 system. So it's worth having those expectations set up front to make sure people understand that.
Thanks a lot. Hope that answers your question, Mark. And we actually have 3 questions on this slide here, but I really want to make sure that the people who sent in questions in advance get a chance to have them answered. So I'm going to skip through this slide and come back.
Okay.
Sorry about that, but we'll come back. So Daniel sent in a question, and let me make sure that Daniel is muted so that he can ask his question live over the phone. All right, there he goes. All right, Daniel.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. We've not really used the 5.0 auditor reports module because I've had other priorities. I'm that one person that is doing the dev and the admin in this company, and it's something that keeps coming up. So I'd like to start producing some reports for the management here, so they can see the sort of usage within the organisation, so they can see the take-up and target and encourage both our internal users and our clients. And I've spoken to Thake in the UK, and they've sort of hinted that we can get the data out, either XML or I think it's CSV. But it'd be great to import that into SharePoint via something like analysis services.
Yeah.
Is that the recommendation? And if so, is there any sort of blog posts or resources I can access to get me quickly up to speed doing that?
Yeah, so just to explain just for the people on the call might not know what Auditor is. So in SharePoint out of the box, there is an auditing functionality per site collection. The biggest problem with the auditing out of the box for SharePoint is that the audit logs are stored in the content database. Now, we all know there are some limits on TechNet around the size of the content database in 2010, which did change recently, but also the number of items in that database. Now, if you're auditing everything, so every time someone reviews a document, every time someone edits a document or deletes a document or publishes a document, you can imagine that the amount of audit log items grows very, very quickly. And therefore, what happens is it does start to impact that site collection's performance because the content database is getting very, very dense. Now, by default, after 60 days, the audit logs are pruned. Now, a lot of the time with the audit, you want to be able to retain that data for maybe 7 years from a legal perspective. Maybe to be able to go if someone leaves the organisation, what did they actually look at whilst they were at the organisation? Maybe there was a court case that came up. So what Auditor does is, on a scheduled basis, pulls all those audit logs out of the SharePoint content databases into its own SQL database. And therefore, our Auditor, when it does queries which you can run within DocAv Auditor, it does those queries across the SQL database and not the SharePoint database. Now, the question really is how can we get like a visual representation of that? Well, we do have Report Manager, which with Auditor, you're an asset for that as well. You may want to check, Daniel. And the Report Manager will actually display those reports from a users and analytics perspective. So you can do kind of like queries on those things. Now, it really does depend what kind of graphics, what kind of visualizations you're looking to produce. Is it really kind of like web analytics style stuff, or?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I've seen the Report Manager, but I've been led to believe that you're because the two modules are distinct, and they didn't seem to be. They seem very distinct, in fact. It's a different way of getting the data out. Because if you look at some of the options, you have a schedule, and you can email that data to you on a regular basis. You can apply the plans. So it would indicate that it's. I've been told conflicting things. I've been told I should use analysis services.
Yeah.
I'm really confused. This confuses me. So I've asked this question a couple of times, and I've had different answers.
Yeah, I understand why you get the different ones. I mean, the standard answer would be Report Center because you can do those queries. I'm guessing the reason they're saying SQL Server Analysis Services is, you can definitely start building reports directly off the audit tables. There is a schema document that will help to show you what fields are in what tables, so you can actually start building queries out. And I believe I can put you in touch with the product manager, and he can give you a few sample reports that actually show some visualizations there as well.
Yeah, that'd be useful. I'm working very closely with Laura, who's one of the UK managers.
Right. Okay.
Laura Cole.
Well,
so I guess
if you ping me an email, I'll get in touch with Laura, and also our product manager will be able to help more directly with this. So my email is just jeremy.thake@avpoint.com. So feel free to, we'll take this offline, and we'll definitely help you with.
All right, thank you. Yeah, because I would like to get some results, and I may be doing a joint talk with Laura on this, so it'd be good for my talk.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, thank you.
Cheers, Daniel.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Daniel, for sending your question in, and Jeremy for answering it. I'm going to go back up because I think it's important to talk about how to automate governance. And I know we're running slightly out of time, but do you think that you can possibly answer that in 7 minutes?
Yes. How do you automate So, excuse me. So, as I've mentioned, we have policies that are defined by the governance committee, and we have certain processes. So the big one that I tend to notice that organisations start with is that the policies around creating a new sub-site within the organisation. Now, there's different forms of automation, right? So we can define the process of what needs to happen to get a new sub-site. So maybe a new project kicks off, and we need all of the policies defined on, okay, so when the project kicks off, what do I actually need? I need a new sub-site, I'm going to have these content types, I'm going to have these document templates set up, etc. Maybe it uses a particular site template. And traditionally what we've seen in an organisation is they build custom applications to do this. They may have an info path form that submits the request to a SharePoint list, which kicks off a workflow. When that workflow is approved, there's a bunch of stuff that happens in the background to then create that sub-site and configure everything required. What we noticed was that as I went around talking to other organisations, a lot of these companies were doing the same thing. And as we started capturing the requirements of what their products were doing, and this was when I very started, we decided we were actually going to build a product. So we actually have a product coming out at the end of June called Governance Automation. And what that's done is it's captured all of those common governance type requests that come up, whether it be, I'm leaving the organisation, I need all my documents and data to be transferred to this new person, or I need a new sub-site, or I need new site collection, or I've got this sandbox solution and I want it to be deployed into the SharePoint environment, or actually I know that I've deleted these documents, but I know we're using Docker Backup, can we restore these documents? All those common kind of use cases that come up, we now build a request system inside this new product called Governance Automation, which allows you to automate that. As I say, you don't necessarily need that product. You can go out and build those solutions yourself. But what we're finding with kind of mature organisations in the enterprise space is that it does start to become a build versus buy. And there's been a few companies recently where the automated governance products they've built have been great. But the problem is they've been built by one developer who was really keen, maybe he was doing it his own time, or he was given a day rate to build these things. But then he's left the organisation because now he's a SharePoint gun and knows he can get a load of money elsewhere in a consultancy company. And there's no support, there's no documentation, etc., because it hasn't been treated like a true application. So the build versus buy, if you can internally build the product and you can purchase the product, it may be better to purchase a product from the perspective that every 3 months we're going to release more mature iterations of this product, and we're going to really see the benefits because we're gathering governance requirements in this cases from all the companies we speak to. So so the automation is definitely out there in the wild. And it's very similar in lots of different organisations, but it's very we've had to be quite configurable with our product to ensure that it meets all the little weird requirements that businesses need, like the ability to say we're not going to use SharePoint groups at all. All permissions are going to be derived via Active Directory groups directly on the site. So those kind of things we've had to build into the product to make sure we cover all the different kind of expectations that the business have on those kind of use cases.
Well, thanks a lot. I was always wondering that because it makes sense now that what you're saying, that there are certain processes that most organizations have to do, and you can kind of build around it.
Yeah, and there's if you go to avpoint.com /governance automation, if you're not sick of my voice already, there's another webinar on there that kind of gets type and shows you kind of what that does in a lot more detail.
Thanks so much, Jeremy.
You're welcome.
And so I just wanted to, talk about nothing but SharePoint before you leave, because I know there's a lot of traffic there, and sometimes people don't really understand that, how to submit an article there or what articles you accept and how that whole process works. I was wondering if you could just share with the group, because I believe the more active you are in SharePoint, even if it's just writing your own personal blogs, the more you learn. So if you can just give a quick overview.
Yeah, so, Nothing but SharePoint has been around for a while now, and I think we've got about 60 authors. There is a big contribute link in the bottom of the page. And Natasha is our editor. There's two more options you've got there. If you've got your own blog, excuse me, if you've got your own blog and you've written a blog post and you believe that it's, it's getting enough interest that you want it to have a bigger audience, our audience at the minute is 135,000 unique visitors a month, and it's growing as and when we can spread the word, and obviously with search engines picking stuff up. So, your blog may be getting 4,000 uniques, so the difference between that and ours is quite exponential, and it can definitely build your profile. Now, the key is it is SharePoint 2010, so if you want, you can log in. We are using Live ID, so you can log in with your MSN Messenger account, and then if you touch base with Natasha, she'll give you permissions to create new articles. And you can actually go and create the articles yourself and format them and then submit them for approval. If you're not comfortable with using SharePoint to create your articles, and obviously it has gone all up in 2010, Natasha will actually accept Word documents as well. So if you've built your article out in Word, you can, with all your images and your screenshots and code snippets and stuff, Natasha will actually take that and publish it for you, which often is a lot quicker than going into SharePoint and doing that yourself. So there's two real options there, and as I say, the contribute button at the bottom of the footer of every single page is definitely the best place to start there. In terms of what kind of articles, we have a developer channel, which is obviously the one I own, the end user channel, which Mark Miller owns, and the IT Pro channel, which we share. So between those things, we cover off a lot of different areas, and I encourage you to go and have a look. If you're not sure what kind of article you want to, what topic you want to write on, we have a list of topics that we'd love to kind of encourage people to start writing on. And, if you just need a bit of a push in the right direction, happy to have a chat with you to encourage you in that space.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think it's a very valuable tool, and I'm happy that you helped to get it started. Before you leave, there was one other question that came in about governance automation, and they were just wondering if Nicole was wondering if there are any cost information available or estimates for budgeting.
Yeah, so the best thing to do, because I dodge licensing questions like the plague, is to reach out to a sales representative. So depending on your region, you'll have different sales people that you can talk to. Feel free to email me on jeremy.thake@avport.com and just let me know where you're based in terms of region, and I'll make sure the appropriate person reaches out to you and have a bit of a discussion there. But as I say, the microsite at avport.com/governance automation has a lot of information. There's a white paper there and a series of webinars on purely governance, as well as a webinar which introduces the products as well.
Well, thank you so much. I don't know if there's any last minute thoughts that you might want to share with the group or anything, but I really appreciate you coming on and sharing such valuable information, and also just letting the audience know that Jeremy is very open with helping you on your own spare time. So let me go back up to that slide with this information. And thanks again, Jeremy. Any last words?
I'd like to say thanks very much for the questions, and I encourage those guys that did ask questions that want to follow up to please email me. And I'm just like to say, from a selfish perspective, I do like to hear people's problems because it does inspire me to write new articles on different areas. And also it's not just the articles; it can inspire new products for us to build. I work in the AvPort Labs division, which at the minute we're building brand new prototypes of products every 3 months, which are final prototypes which we pitch to various enterprise customers. And if we get a bit of interest in those products, we then actually formalize those into full-blown products. So, if you have any problems and you're like, why doesn't this happen in SharePoint? Wouldn't it be great if you could do this? I'd love to hear from you guys, because I'm very much into the innovation aspects of SharePoint at the moment, and I'm looking for some really cool ideas.
Thanks for listening to a highlighted segment of SharePoint ShopTalk. Join us live and ask your own questions every Thursday, 12:30 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You may also become a member on our site at SharePointShopTalk.com.